126th day of the war. The losses of Russia in the war with Ukraine exceeded 1 million people. The pace has increased in the last year and a half and continues to grow, since due to a shortage of equipment, the assault of the RF is practically exclusively infantry, that is, meat. The figures of the General Staff of Ukraine are indirectly confirmed by Russian soldiers telling how they are fighting. In the Sumy direction, only 8 of the hundreds of soldiers sent for the assault returned. This level of loss is simply out of the question. Israel attacked Iranian nuclear facilities after someone refused to develop nuclear weapons. The strikes look very successful. The new war in the Middle East has already led to a price surge in oil, but this may be a temporary effect. In general, of course, this is the event of the world level, which will affect a lot. So, for example, Trump was able to make sure that Putin is not such an assistant in negotiations with Iran, and Putin is that Trump is not always limited to endless negotiations. Ukraine continues to strike on the objects of the Russian AFK. It turned out to be a company called Resonit, which produces electronics. Their products are used in various industries, such as automotive electronics, lighting, fire protection devices, telecommunications, measuring and household appliances, industrial automation, and medicine. It is noted that the 7th grade printing boards produced by this factory are also used in aerospace and defense industry. In the Sumy region, the AFK is counterattacking in some areas, but the situation is still difficult for Ukrainian soldiers. Russian troops continue to attempt the offensive and meet assaults. About all this and much more in today's fresh summary. You can support it with your like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. Especially your subscriptions are important, because for YouTube this is one of the main indicators to spread the video further. Well, as you can see, I'm a little in such hiking conditions, not in my usual studio, so I apologize for the light or the setting of the frame or something like that. In general, you understand. You can support the channel financially on Patreon, the link is in the description, or by buying NVPN. This is a means of bypassing blockages that we do together with the technical team. It helps bypass blockages, actually use YouTube at normal speed, use Twitter, Instagram, and soon, probably, Telegram, because the Russian state somehow says more and more about the possibility of its slowdown or blocking. Buy NVPN by the links in the description. This is legal in Russia. You can buy and use VPNs. While buying NVPN, you support the video output on this channel. Losses of the Russian armed forces since the beginning of a full-scale war with Ukraine exceeded 1 million people, reported by the General Staff of the Soviet Union. Given that the results of the GSH are considered both killed and wounded, their numbers are close to the truth, with a correction on the fact that, as noted, for example, in the BBC, more than once wounded or first wounded, and then killed are considered in this figure by 2 and more times. This phenomenon is not uncommon, given how fast and in what condition Russian soldiers return to service. But still, each unit of this million is at least a temporarily beaten Russian occupant, especially since at the moment it is not so important whether we are talking about the killed or wounded. In any case, parts of the bearing losses lose their combat capabilities and cannot continue to attack without recovery. The General Staff separately noted that more than 628,000 of this million are losses in the USSR over the past 1.5 years. Just before the period of non-stop Russian offensive actions, which are bypassed by Russia at a very high price. We will talk more about Russian losses and prospects with you in the coming days because the topic is important. Main international news is, of course, the massive strikes of Israel on the most different objects in Iran. Apparently, in Israel they were impressed with the prospects of Trump on the conclusion of the deal with Iran, which was supposed to ensure his nuclear-free status, and decided to try to guarantee the absence of a nuclear bomb in a more straightforward way. So far, there are not so many attacks known, only that it took place in several waves. The objects of the Iranian nuclear missile program were hit, as well as the liquidated types of Iranian nuclear scientists. The leaders of the Guard Corps of the Islamic Revolution are a parallel idealized army that has its own missile and drone program, led by the Iranian proxies in the Middle East, but those that remained of them after the Israeli strikes on Hamas and Hezbollah, as well as the overthrow of the Assad regime in Syria. Some apparently tried to liquidate right in their own apartments with high-precision ammunition. Parallel to the shelling, as stated, there were secret operations of the Mossad. I suppose that against underground research and military facilities, some of which were not hit by any missiles. The dust on Tehran has not yet settled, and in Israel they are already waiting for a counterattack, which Iran will have to deliver in order to at least try to save its face. Perhaps we will talk about this in more detail in the coming days, but it must be said that, of course, Iran is a terrorist state, at least in the current regime, and the appearance of a terrorist state of nuclear weapons leads to what Russia and the Soviet Union have led, as you can see, Russia is now difficult to stop, including due to the fact that they have nuclear weapons. First of all, America is afraid of nuclear weapons, Europe is afraid of nuclear weapons, and it is very difficult to coexist with them in the future. Therefore, the appearance of nuclear weapons in a country that organizes a diversion around the world, sponsors terrorism directly, and declares the need to destroy another country, in this case Israel, is unacceptable, at least for those countries that can be the object of attack, namely for Israel. And since Trump did not come to anything with his nuclear deal, telling that now we will conclude, but in the end Iran sent him to hell, and therefore negotiations with Putin did not give anything. Because, as you remember, the last call of Trump was not dedicated to Ukraine, it was dedicated to Iran. Trump really wanted Putin to help him interact with Iran, but as you can see, the negotiator from Putin is about the same as the military, so of course, it did not lead to anything. This will have quite a lot of different consequences, one of them we see now in the rise in oil prices. But this is such a hysterical market reaction, I don't think it will last long. I think that oil will go down quite quickly, but I'm not an economist, let's ask Vladimir Milov. On Sunday, what will happen next with oil? Also, Trump was able to make sure that, to put it mildly, his, as it seems to him, existing ability to conclude a deal does not actually exist. He saw that Putin is no useless person, that is, he has no influence on Iran. In general, many people saw a lot of things, so I think that we will see various consequences of all this. But for now, it is only necessary to note that, indeed, Israel was able to successfully strike down Iranian nuclear objects. Successfully strike down Iranian generals, here Iran, there in response to the moment when I recorded my report, launched some drones. And also, it's interesting, if Iran did not sell drones to Russia, and if it did not sell the technology of these Shah drones, then Israel and America and Great Britain, which helps Israel to counteract these drones, would have much less information about these drones, and it would be much more difficult for them to counteract these drones. Therefore, this is how everything in the world is connected, because Iran helped Russia and handed over these Shads, and because of this, now these Shads know everything, and it is much easier to beat them than it would be if Russia did not hand over the technology. Well, we are moving on to the Special Ambassador Kellogg, the Special Ambassador to Trump in Ukraine, and Kellogg continues to show himself as hardly the most adequate character in the current administration, but at least among the existing ones. Zelensky fights for the survival of the nation on his land just as Abraham Lincoln did, Kellogg stated in his speech at the German Marshall Foundation Forum in Brussels. He, Lincoln, fought for the survival of the nation on his land, national sovereignty. And when you see this, you must understand the problems that Ukrainians face right now on the battlefield, he noted. In general, there are not so many examples in history when the Democrats fought a long, exhausting battle for their own survival. In fact, the North during the Civil War in the United States, France in the First World War, Great Britain in the Second World War, and now Ukraine. Before them, there were similar challenges: the fatigue of society from the war and the growth of desertion, criticism of the actions of military political leadership in the press and in the opposition, the search for a thin line between the necessary restrictions of democratic freedoms and the establishment of a dictatorship. Kellogg found a rather close example for the Americans, which I hope, at least for some of you, will respond, although many of the supporters of Trump believe that the wrong side won then. The head of Kellogg, meanwhile, remains in his repertoire. Trump says that both Russia and Ukraine disappointed him. I am very disappointed in Russia, but I am also disappointed in Ukraine because I think that it was possible to conclude the deal. Trump quoted Donald Trump, a CBS correspondent who was at the White House. This same quote was passed on to the AFP agency, noting that Trump also said that 6,000 people per week die in the war, including civilians in whom missiles hit. What is he going to do with this? Trump again will not clarify. Meanwhile, the American administration continues pointless acts of goodwill towards Russia, which do not affect Russian leadership at all, but repel allies and partners. Secretary of State Marco Rubio congratulated the Russians on the Day of Russia and reminded the United States of its desire to achieve peace between the RF and Ukraine. The congratulation was published on the Gazdeep website. On behalf of the American people, I want to congratulate the Russians on the Day of Russia, and the United States is still supporting the Russians in their aspirations for a bright future. We also use the opportunity to confirm the aspirations of the United States to constructive cooperation with the Russian Federation to achieve a strong peace between Russia and Ukraine. We hope that the establishment of peace will contribute to a more mutually beneficial relationship between our countries, he said in a message. You of course ask yourself a question, but congratulated what it is. But here the contrast, why did this cause many people a negative reaction? Because the contrast between what the United States should do and between what they're doing. The United States must force Putin to a real negotiation, press on the Russian Federation in order for it to stop killing Ukrainians every day. And instead, here Rubio not only refers to the people and not with any appeal, he also refers to the authorities and says that we want to cooperate with the Russian Federation. And the inconsistency of what is expected from the United States, that is, the approach to the end of the war, is about something else. And this did not cause a very positive response from a large number of people. And a little more international news, this time from Mali. We recently mentioned this country in connection with the replacement of Tom Wagner at the African Corps under the control of the Ministry of Defense. It became more known how exactly the mercenaries of Wagner helped the local junta. The network of illegal prisons of CHVK Wagner in Mali was discovered by journalists and investigators. Former prisoners told about torture for Russian music. At least 6 secret prisons created in Mali by Russian mercenaries from CHVK Wagner were found by journalists Forbidden Stories, France 24, Le Monde, and Important Stories in a joint investigation. The existence of the prison was confirmed by the testimony of former prisoners who are now in a refugee camp in Mauritania, where 118,000 Mali people who fled from the civil conflict in the country live. Some of the prisons are located on the territory of military bases. Former prisoners told journalists about torture, current, drowning, sticks, and content in a metal container under the scorching sun. One of the prisoners said that they were usually tortured for Russian music. According to experts, the number of such prisons may be much larger. Wagner has prisons almost everywhere where they are based on all those who were arrested but did not kill immediately. It turns out that in these prisons they kidnap prostitutes, traders, transporters, said an analyst journalist specializing in the African region of Sahel, which includes Mali. The mercenaries of the VK Wagner began to operate in Mali since the end of 1921, after the arrival of the military junta and the departure of the French military mission. They captured power as a result of the coup in Mali in the 20th year of Colonel Assimi Goïta established ties with Russia and repeatedly met or called with Vladimir Putin. According to journalists, the investigation into the secret prisons of the VK Wagner in Mali was carried out within the framework of the Project Victoria, named after the Ukrainian journalist Victoria Roskina. She investigated illegal arrests in the occupied Russian territories. She herself was captured and died in September 1924, and her body was returned with traces of torture. Apparently, the VK Wagner exchange agent in Mali also has a weak user of Twitter, e.g. Akmahamed, a supporter of Tuareg separatists who had previously told about the destruction of the VK Wagner columns. Now he writes about the attack, presumably by drones on the camp of the African Corps, and publishes a photo of abandoned Russian chevrons. There is not much proof yet, but it was this blogger who recommended himself well during the lighting of the destruction of Wagner, so let's wait for the details. In the background of the noisy statement of the German Minister of Defense Boris Pistorius that the delivery of the Taurus rocket to Ukraine is not planned, which, it seems to me, contradicts the fact that not so long after joining the position, Chancellor Friedrich Merz said. Fairly important news is passed by the general attention. Germany has significantly increased its commitment to the help of Ukraine. In more detail about this, I told about the Channel B or Germany allocates an additional 1.9 billion euros of military aid to 7 billion euros previously deposited in the budget, said Minister of Defense Boris Pistorius, who arrived today with an unannounced visit to Kiev. In total, military aid to Germany in 1925 will amount to 8.9 billion euros, and for Berlin this is a record. Let me remind you that before Friedrich Merz's arrival, 4 billion euros were deposited to help Ukraine in 1925. Thanks to amendments to the constitution, which was initiated by Merz, Germany was able to expand defense loans and withdraw an additional 3 billion euros for Ukraine, and now Germany plans to allocate another 1.9 billion euros. This is the role of one specific person, elected at the right time at the right place. Instead of 4 billion, Ukraine receives 8.9 billion euros. What exactly will be allocated in new 1.9 billion euros is not known yet, but now a plan to supply Ukraine with a PYRST system for 3 years in advance is being developed. And to the sanctions news, Slovakia rejects a new package of sanctions against Russia, which should be adopted unilaterally. Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fides rejects the planned new sanctions against Russia in their current form. Slovakia will not support the 18th package of sanctions against Russia if the Euro Commission does not present a solution to the crisis that Slovakia will face after the complete termination of gas, oil, and nuclear fuel supplies from Russia. He wrote on Facebook, "Yesterday, the Euro Commission presented a proposal for a package of sanctions that, first of all, are aimed at Russia's revenues from the energy sector, the banking sector, and the defense industry. The package should be adopted unilaterally by 27 member states of the European Union. And while the European Union deals with its countries that do not really want to do anything that can harm Russia, let me remind you That the main defense of Ukraine, the main support of Ukraine, and those who have simply been saving Ukraine for the last few years are its army, its military. Therefore, it is so important to help them collect various funds that help them destroy fascists and occupiers and save their own lives. Therefore, today we continue to gather, and this time a meeting on drones and a car for one of the Ukrainian units. Here is their address to you. I wish you good health. We are fighters of the 33rd OSHB in the company Horn Group. We ask you, Michael, and your subscribers to open a new collection for 1 million hryvnias, which will help us to buy equipment, repair damaged pickups. We are now performing tasks in the Donetsk direction. We have run out of money to collect, to buy antennas, to buy FPV drones, to repair cars. I will be very grateful to you with all my team. Glory to Ukraine. Here is the QR code to the Monobank. In the description there is a link to the Monobank, to PayPal, to private, to cryptocurrency, USDT 20, Bitcoin, Ethereum. In general, help in any convenient way for you. You literally help save the lives of Ukrainian defenders, and thank you very much. I will also participate in this meeting. All links are in the description. Well, we continue. Ukraine continues to beat on the Russian defense. On the night of June 12, drones flew to the factory in the Moscow Zubov. Local publics write that the company Resonit, which produces electronics, was first hit. Their products are used in various industries, such as automotive electronics, lighting, fire and security devices, telecommunications, measuring devices, industrial, automation, and medicine. It is noted that the 7th grade printed boards produced by this factory are used both in aerospace and defense industry. Meanwhile, the Russian company OPK is slowly starting to adapt to the blows of Ukrainian drones. At the Russian military plant, Sverdlov, which specializes in the production of explosive substances, in particular air bombs, anti-drone nets appeared. Ukrainian resource Dnipro Asin Garbus writes, "We noticed that anti-aircraft nets were stretched over the systems for the production of vinegar anhydride. This is a novelty for the Russians. Earlier, the nets were installed only on the oil bases, not on the double plants," researchers note. But on the crystal-fueled strategic aviation Engels 2 that supplies the attack oil base on the days, the nets were not stretched, and it is not a fact that it would help. Anyway, judging by the satellite image, which is provided by the analyst M.T. Anderson, the oil base has been on fire for 6 days. Also, Dnipro Asin Garbus demonstrates the results of one of the recent Ukrainian strikes in the Moscow region. On May 28, Ukrainian UAVs hit 2 factories in the city of Dubna in the Moscow region, one of which is the design bureau Raduga. The enterprise produces H-101 cruise missiles for the Russian Armed Forces, which is actively used by the Russian strategic aviation to bombard Ukrainian cities. The factory workshop, damaged after the UAV strike, is visible on the image, which is a very good result for one drone, the authors of the channel note. All the same, Dnipro Asin Garbus shows the destroyed object in the Rilsk district of the Kursk region. According to the indirect data, there is a headquarters of heads of the 155th Marine Brigade. The key word was found. The Russian comm in the Kursk region does not have to wait. Finally, the consequences of the Ukrainian Operation Peacock continue to be felt. After the unprecedented Ukrainian attack of UAVs on the Russian airfields of the Far East, Moscow rebased its strategic bombers Tu-160, Tu-95MS, and Tu-22M3 from military airfields. The Irkutsk and Murmansk regions, on other airfields mostly in the Far East, satellite images are shown and the audio analytics Avivector is sounded. Russia concentrated its Tu-160 bombers on the Ilyazov airfields in Kamchatka, Anderno, Chukotka, and Borisovskoye in Kazan, said Avivector. 7 Tu-160 aircraft, which were based on the airfields of the White Irkutsk region, left the airfield in the middle of the past week, satellite images taken on the night of the last Thursday. The morning of Thursday, the last of the 3 Tu-160s flew out of the Ilinia airfields in the Murmansk region, which was their airfield base earlier. By the morning of Saturday, all Tu-95MS flew from the airfield near Murmansk. 2 Tu-160 bombers were placed in Anderno. Chukotka indicates satellite images of the military airfield from last Saturday. The Tu-160s, including one passing modernization, were placed at the Borisovskoye airfield in Tatarstan, according to the satellite image, which was taken last Friday. At the Ilyazov airfield in Kamchatka, according to the satellite image taken on the night of Thursday, there were 3 Tu-160s. On the next day, 11 Tu-22M3 bombers were sent to the Murmansk region at the Ukrainian airfield, after the attack of the Ukrainian UAVs, said Avivector. Last Tuesday, 295 MS bombers were sent there, according to its data, from the military airfield Angels 2 in the Saratov region. 222 M3 bombers arrived at Angels 2 base on Sunday night. 222 M3s landed on the airfield in Mozdok in North Ossetia on Monday, which has not been used in recent years from Russian aviation, said Avavector. 222 M3s were taken off at the Borisogolskoye airfield in Tatarstan. Russia, in turn, continues to terrorize the Ukrainian civilians. They do not stop every night raids on Kharkov. This time, as a result of the attack, 18 people were injured, including 4 children. More than 10 cars, residential buildings, 2 schools, a kindergarten were damaged. The building of the store was completely destroyed. In addition, a blow was struck at the Kharkov region of Russia under the staff of the GSC, who were engaged in demining, said the department. During the demining of the agriculture in Kugod, the Russian troops cynically attacked the rescuers in the liberated areas of the Izum district. The enemy sent a strike drone directly to the working unit of the Minewolf MV-370 demining machine when the sappers carried out its maintenance and checked the work. Unfortunately, 1 pyrotechnic died. 2 more of his colleagues are now injured in the hospital, and doctors are fighting for their lives. The price of safety is extremely high. Every day our heroes go to dangerous work to clean the Ukrainian land from the deadly heritage of war. Every loss in the GSC family is called pain. In the Izum region, the Russians are slowly being pushed out. Vladimir Zelensky stated this in yesterday's evening video message. Apparently there are several counterattacks in mind, which the defense forces managed to carry out, and I talked about them in previous reports. Let's see if this trend will remain and if it will be possible to stabilize the situation in this direction in the near future. So far, the Ukrainian forces are still having problems in Sumchina, including those related to the previously built, their unsuitable fortifications, says the Ukrainian military author of the Telegram channel officer. I hope the Sumchina region will become an example of what fortifications should not be built, he writes. First, we fought for them to start building them at all, and now for them to build as they should. It's been a long time since it was clear that the times of powerful platoon and family support points have long passed. Conditions on the battlefield have radically changed over the past year, and in the first place, now the mask of positions, because if you're lit up, and it is difficult not to notice such a fucking thing, then you will be fucking until you are compared to the ground. I'm not talking about such structures in the middle of the field, or in general a joke in one of the directions, whoop in the forest, and all the trees around it are going to the ground. Masking, says the officer. The analysis of the NAFCO has updated the calculations of the confirmed loss of equipment on the Kerch direction. According to this data, in 20 days from May 19 to June 9, the defense forces have lost no less than 29 units of equipment. The USSR has 13 units. Does the combat action in Sumchina go there? It is not entirely clear, but this is not particularly important, since there the Russians attack almost without equipment. It can also be noted that both sides have lost more equipment in the past 2 weeks than in the last 20 days, 46 and 16 units respectively. Since the intensity of the fights in Kerchina and Sumchina does not weaken, it can be assumed that both sides have become less likely to use equipment. I recently brought here the story of a participant of the so-called SVO with a proverb about huge losses in the Sumchina direction. Let me remind you that out of hundreds of people who went on the assault in Kondratovka, 92 did not return, and the rest were accused of cowardice for surviving, even though they carried out the flag picking in Kondratovka. Though it seems that there was some kind of anti-crisis about this appeal. So far, without Solovyov, but from this no less stubborn military officer with a call for relay, who had previously told about the lawlessness of the commanders of the military unit 10103, there have been threats of accusations that he is not a former participant of the SVO. All sorts of calls come to me and they tell me about the threats that I am dressed, and in response to this, the soldier recorded a new video in which he showed his numerous awards. All the awards, including the gold coin, Wagner, yes, I think everyone knows what it is, who took part in the Medal for Courage. Another Medal for Courage, Bakhmutskoy Masuraka, the son of Solidar, the son of Bakhmut, well, in our project medal. Accordingly, I have awards which prove that I really was there, and that I am not some unmarried, in respect of all the above said about me. Moreover, the soldier with the call for Afghan with which the story of the air raid began, which raised flags over the settlement of Kondratovka. This time, Kondratovka personally recorded an appeal in which he confirmed the authenticity of all the above said, and we had to die like dogs there. Also, yesterday I was forced to write a report, because the video. From the relay, Andrew's relay was a fake, and I did not sign it. They wrote it themselves, and I did not sign anything. I did not write a report. We are moving in the Pokrovskaya direction on the western flank of the Pokrovskaya direction. Russian troops are approaching the borders of the Dnepropetrovsk region, but so far they have not fortified. Although, as I said in the previous reports, separate groups of Russians are already marching in the neighboring region and are successfully zeroing out there. Details are brought by the Ukrainian military author of the Telegram channel Officer. This is what he writes. The Russians have moved to the western flank. In the Pokrovskaya direction, there are about 300-400 meters left to the border admin, but on our side, the guy is holding on, so far everything is fine. In the area of Novonikolivka, Novosergivka also seems to be stable, the officer thinks. As you may have noticed, he is not directly predisposed to some kind of cap throwing, and on the contrary, he perceives a lot of what is happening in the Ukrainian defense very critically. So if we say that it is stable, then everything is probably really not so bad. The Russians are concentrating airstrikes on the eastern flank of the Pokrovskaya direction, and due to the rest of the directions of the Ukrainian defense line, says the analyst Klemt Molin. This is what he writes. From the satellite, it can be seen that the Russian army is conducting a large-scale training of airstrikes on the second Ukrainian defense line. I managed to record almost 1,000 airstrikes on a small section of the front between Pokrovskaya and Konstantinovka. It's just colossal. On a compact territory, about 950 recent airstrikes were delivered on the map, scattered across the fields and forest strips near the Ukrainian positions. These strikes began about May 25, less than 20 days ago, after the Russian troops advanced along the defense line. It can be seen how the Ukrainian positions disappear after multiple airstrikes. This area I previously described as the likely next goal of the Russian offensive with the intention of reaching Druzhkovka, avoiding direct fights inside Pokrovskaya. The satellite images of Sentinel-2 show the scale and targetability of these airstrikes. Strikes are often applied directly along the forest strips in response to the new Ukrainian tactics of creating small hidden positions. Most of the strikes take place on the western edge of the recent Russian captures, near the anti-tank bursts. The strikes along the Druzhkov-Konstantinovka axis are much smaller, which can indicate two things: either the Ukrainian positions are weaker there, or Russia intends to bypass Pokrovskaya from the east. This may allow them to reopen the western front near Pokrovskaya and at the same time attack from the east, which will potentially enable them to capture Pokrovskaya and Konstantinovka by the 26th. There is nowhere in Ukraine, except for Sumy, which I will tell you separately, there is no such concentration of airstrikes. For example, to the south of Pokrovskaya, despite the fact that this is one of the most active sections of the front, no more than 15 recent strikes were recorded. This is not the first time that I have observed such a density of airstrikes in a small area. This has already happened in Rabatino in 1923 and under Kursk in 1924. Such a concentration of strikes is also observed in the Sumy region to the north of the city, especially in the forest areas where the Ukrainian troops hide, holding back the offensive of Russia. I can assume that the KSRF concentrates airstrikes on such relatively narrow areas of the front not from good life, but precisely for the reason that Ukrainian defense is now very atomized. No one uses large platoon and family bases, since in modern conditions these are literally magnets for drones and cables, so you have to put an air bomb literally on each individual hole, and if something is effective, this can only be done on such a narrow area. Let's see if in the coming days of the week it will be possible to convert this tactic into a captured square kilometer. In the south of the Donetsk region, the deep state records the progress of the Russian troops in the many-suffering Bogatiri, and the author of the Telegram channel Officer tells about the difficult situation in this area. The most difficult part of the front, he writes, is where the gray zone is actually already red, because in its nature, the gray zone cannot be so wide. The Russians have been marching in Alexeyevka for a long time. They cannot be fixed in any way, but they have been wandering there since the times when the battles for the Bogatiri were going on. They also flew into the Zelene Kuta, but they died. I hope that the appropriate measures for stabilization will be taken, because even purely on the map, this looks as bad as the officer thinks. Let me remind you that the former Ukrainian military inspector Konstantin Mushevitz was afraid that the advance of the USSR in Alexeyevka could collapse all Ukrainian equipment in this area. I hope that under such circumstances, at least we will be able to make an organized retreat, as they say, on a more profitable border. We are moving to the Kupinsk direction, on which the Russian forces continue to expand the bridgehead on the western bank of the river Oskal to the north of Kupinsk, in order to in the future attack either the city itself or the Great Burlak along the border. Deep State tells more about the situation, the movement of the enemy on the right bank of the river Oskal. It should be noted that these designations on the map are rather clarifying after the confirmation of the advance of the Russians, analysts explain. The enemy has long been putting pressure on the Dvyurichnaya River. The infantry was constantly draining into the depth and over time took over the inhabited point, which they initially aimed at when forming plots of arms, since in the Dvyurichnaya River you can create a support point with the possibility of accumulating infantry and other resources for further offensive. The enemy managed to get close to the village for a long time, but there is no success in the further advance of the Kotsaps, the same in the direction of Figlovka, which they repeatedly tried to capture. The main resource of the enemy is infantry and drones. They also do not stop attempts to transfer equipment through the Oskal, but so far without much success. Although over time the expansion of the distance can play its role, they will still be able to drag it to the other bank. There is also continued pressure in the area of Kondrashevka, the authors of the project add. The new commander of the Ukrainian Army of Unmanned Systems, Robert Madyro Brody, began to implement his plans, which I talked about in a separate video, as well as taking care of the growing problems of Russian drone operators. The changes to the table of the EX system, how it works, I talked about in the same video, but let me remind you that the units score points for the confirmed destruction of certain targets, and then you can buy drones and other equipment for them. So, the infantrymen and BPA operators were significantly imitated in the system, and on the contrary, they began to give less for armored vehicles. The analytics are provided by Igor Levin. The new commander of the Ukrainian Army of Unmanned Systems, Robert Madyro Brody, announced changes in the score system for the units of BPA, says Levin. In particular, the points for the destruction of the enemy's living force have increased, in order to increase the withdrawal of the personnel of the USSR to 35,000 per month, which should not allow them to move forward due to the number of advantages. Also, the points for the destruction of Russian BPA operators have increased significantly, and in fact, they become one of the most priority goals. At the same time, the points for the destruction of armored vehicles have been lowered. Madyro believes that this will not affect the effectiveness of the counteraction by the Russian armored columns, but will allow to eliminate a number of casualties. For example, the resumption of drones for the complete destruction of the battle vehicles. For the points scored in this way, the units, I remind you, receive new BPAs of those types that they themselves consider necessary. At the same time, the unit can receive much more drones than is spent on the destruction of the enemy on average. Thus, the expansion of the scale of operations is stimulated. Few numbers voiced by Madyro. For the drone operator, 15 points for the wounded, 25 points for the killed. For the wounded infantryman, 8 points, 12 points for the killed infantryman. The range of drones per point is as follows. Usual FPV drone is 1.3 points. The FPV drone with a thermal imager is 4.5 points. That is, for a liquidated Russian infantryman, you can get 9 FPV drones. For a drone operator, 19. That is, the Russian operator is envious when they find out. Madyro also plans to hold a meeting with the representatives of the units, both top and chosen by chance, to analyze their current needs and proposals. The author of the Telegram channel, Officer, commented on the introduction. He notes a special attention to the enemy pilot. Just after listening to the address of the newly appointed commander of the SBSU, he finally heard what should have been paid attention to for a long time: the destruction of enemy FPV drones. In fact, the whole concept of the rap means from small to large is a struggle not with the cause of the problem, but with its consequence. And the reason for the inability to set up normal logistics, the inability to carry out mechanized assaults, are the Russian FPV pilots, which are now just dark. There are even one-time pilots who are sitting almost with infantry at zero. And here we see a completely new priority from the SBSU, an increase in interest in the destruction of enemy drone crews, which will not only cause losses to the enemy, but will significantly facilitate our life if all units change the focus of combat work. I will not say that this is something brilliant and fundamentally new, but finally we see a different, more specialized approach. I hope that the command of the SBSU will be able, with the help of creative ideas, to organize a kind of hunt for Russian drone operators who have been taken and continue to take the lives of many relatives. The idea is definitely top-notch, the officer thinks. Well, in general, yes, as I told you, the appointment of the head of the SBSU and its extensive plans is now a very big hope and a very big prospect. Look at the video if you missed it. I really believe that this can have a more serious impact on the formation of the drone wall and the destruction of Russian FPV pilots. In general, well, as if. By the reaction of Z channels, I showed you that they were all absolutely confused when they appointed the head of the SBSU to Madyro and complained that, oh damn, and it is impossible for us to have such a person in the army, you know, who is not some kind of mousty general. Headed the company of troops in which he understands well. Well, in general, let's wish Madyro good luck once again. Like all Ukrainian fighters, I really think that it will have an effect, and quite seriously. Ukrainian drone technologies are also not in place, catching up and overtaking the Russians. The Ukrainian answer to Lancet is already on the front line, says Deep State. Let me remind you that Lancet is a Russian pre-war development that has spoiled a lot of blood, not only for Ukrainian tankers and artillerymen, but also for the technique in the rear. The Ukrainian analogy of Lancet has been talked about for a long time, and now it is on the front line. The BULOVA Strike and Reconnaissance Complex, created by Deviro as part of the innovative defense cluster Brave One, performs combat tasks on the front line. Today, it demonstrates the advantage over the Moscow Lancet in terms of key characteristics, and is able to destroy targets even in the rear of the enemy and in conditions of increased complexity. Mikhail Fedorov writes, technology is our asymmetric advantage. The more such solutions, the less chances the enemy has. The technical capabilities of the BULOVA complex are striking high-priority targets. Radio-electron fight means the PVO system, in particular BUK and TOR, effectively works both on stationary and mobile objects, provides video confirmation of the defeat of the target in real time, has a number of unique features that are not disclosed for safety reasons. At the moment, we are short of similar means of defeating the enemy, and in the category of middle strike drones, we are critically behind the Russians, analysts admit, considering the apparatus for strikes at an operational depth of tens of kilometers beyond the front line. Working in this direction is extremely important and necessary, and the emergence of such funds makes us very happy and encourages hope for a more effective counteraction of the enemy at the front line. But there are also bad news about the Ukrainian drone industry, this time brought by volunteer Sergei Sternenko. Despite the numerous complaints from the military, the state continues to buy and supply PV drones to its troops, he says. Last year, we recorded many cases of self-propelled detonation of these drones, which caused the soldiers to be heavily wounded and killed. This year, Phoenix has not yet killed any of our soldiers, but additional detonation of batteries was added to the non-standard commission of the initiative. How many more of our soldiers should kill this shit so that the state stops the purchase of Phoenixes and attracts manufacturers to criminal responsibility? Because this is obvious cowardice on the brink of a diversion, says Sternenko. As you know, Russian drone manufacturers also complain that they are not suitable for the use of PV from Platov, a manufacturer that uses connections in the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. On the other hand, the problem with the supply of low-quality drones from the state is partially alleviated by volunteers, and in Ukraine, by allocating funds to the units themselves for self-purchase of those drones they need, as well as the already mentioned opportunity to purchase them for e-points. Well, indeed, if there are such messages, it makes sense to hold audits for some and see, for example, whether the units themselves order when they have such an opportunity, this type of drones or not. And check whether the characteristics provided by the manufacturers of reality really match and whether there are really reviews about large expenses. It should be understood that Russia has a centralized purchase system, so this problem is larger there. Ukraine buys everything it can buy in all garages. But if yes, there are some low-quality drones among them, then this problem must also be solved, of course, to make the Ukrainian army stronger. Ukrainian methods of protection against drones are also developing. The first Ukrainian traffic light signaling the threat of drones appeared on the front lines. As a radio technology specialist, Sergei Flash Biskresnov reported on the front lines, the enemy attacks with drones, both military and civilian, at a depth of up to 30-40 kilometers. Therefore, such traffic lights will help to warn about danger and save people's lives. Such a traffic light works on a built-in drone detector, which catches the corresponding radio waves. Unfortunately, this means that against drones on the self-propelled, which do not transmit anything and do not receive on the air, it is useless, but still it is much better than nothing. Yesterday, another stage of exchange of seriously injured and seriously ill prisoners of war took place within the framework of the Istanbul agreements. As usual in recent days, the number of returned soldiers is not announced by either side. As noted separately in the Ukrainian Credential Headquarters, part of the Ukrainian soldiers returned to their homeland are considered missing. In fact, this means that the Russian side does not represent the full list of prisoners of war and can hold as many as they want until they are relatives, not negotiators. The components of the list do not know anything about their fate. In a good way, the list of prisoners of war should have been clarified by the Red Cross. However, the meaning of this organization, as you know, is not much, although sometimes there is a lot of harm. Bunker Vladimir Romanov, the same one who recently publicly apologized to the Nazis from Spain, and before that he had a funny post in front of the Kadyrovets, which testifies to the attitude towards war even in the border areas of Russia, so this is what he wrote. June 25, the Belgorod region, Russia, writes comrades working on the border of the region. We arrived at a settlement. We decided to take one altitude. There are abandoned buildings. We think we will stop the equipment for work here, of course. We decided to vote. The head of the district said to go to the district security council. Come to the head of the district security council and say, here we have an abandoned building at an altitude. We want to occupy it for the placement of equipment. The head of the district security council says, the owner of the building left in Kharkov at the beginning of his life. Let's call him in Kharkov and find out if it is possible to settle in the military building. We answered, let's not call the enemy in Kharkov, and we will not use this building. Just imagine, Romanov complains, the official, the head of the district security council in the Belgorod region in contact with Kharkov, is always ready to immediately inform about the placement of the military. Romanov comments bitterly, which, again, the people did not get there. And once again, let me remind you how in Russia they provide the offensive with not quite fresh meat. The military officer again addressed the public with a request to help figure out the situation with the violation of his rights and refusal of proper medical treatment after the injury. Sergei signed a contract in April 1924. In October of the same year, he received a serious injury and was hospitalized at the Kostroma Military Hospital, where he underwent a reanimation and treatment. After a diagnosis of thrombosis, deep veins, and compulsory life therapy, he was sent back to the front, despite his serious condition. The command, despite the existing norms, considers Sergei a fully suitable service, ignoring the weight of his condition. At the age of 60, I came to the unit on the 6th. The unit sent me to the LNR. I was based there, and then the medical staff and the command ordered to take me with such a conclusion to the second line of the front. That is, they did not treat me. I spent 3 months on the second line of the front. I did not receive proper medical attention. However, returning to the unit with such a diagnosis led to a decrease in health, including due to the lack of necessary rehabilitation. During these 3 months, I received osteochondrosis, L4, L5 intrusions, spondyloarthrosis. I walk on a baseball, I still have shrapnel from the first injury, I still have pain in my arm. After thrombosis, I began to suffocate when talking. In all these complications, the hands of the city of the north of Donetsk believe that the consequences and diseases are absent and are put in the category of a year. Sergei tried to get a transplant to the back for full treatment, but he encountered misunderstanding and ignoring the command. In this case, he even hired a military lawyer and sent an appeal to the entire station. But this, as you understand, did not help at all. I signed with all the stations. The results do not give anything. The report is ignored. Sergei's relatives also continue to fight for his rights, but also without a result. My mother went to the FSB. They said they needed the original documents. The original documents are coming in a month. My mother went to the officials, I wrote to the officials. I also addressed all kinds of funds. My mother went, do I really deserve this attitude for 4 combat missions? This story is not about the fact that Sergei is sorry, not sorry at all. A fascist occupant would have died faster. This story is about what will happen to you if you end up in the Russian army. No one will fight for your rights, no one will protect you, and the only one who will talk about the lawlessness against you is me, Michael Nacke. Well, see you soon, all the best, bye.